It's very hard to tell at this point what would the likely outcome be, but what we can say almost for sure is that it will be a lot less worse than it looks like right now. There's already been a big pushback. It's normal for the government to introduce very far-reaching legislation and then start walking it back. And what we're seeing now is that the government's already looking for ways to start walking back this reform. So the likely outcome is something a lot softer. There's probably going to be a rise in the amount of time counted into citizenship, with some guarantees to people who are already inside the process. So it should end up being reasonable. So it depends on what you call migrant or immigrant. When the government talks about immigrants and when people talk about immigrants, they mean two completely different things, which people tend to confuse them. One type of immigrant is the sort of people that came, it's a very large group of people that mostly came illegally to Portugal. There was a process in Portugal that allowed people to enter the country as tourists and then overstay but apply for a regularization of their status and becoming legal over time, and then they can stay, or they could stay in the country as long as this process was ongoing. A lot of good people came to Portugal this way, but also there's been a lot of abuse and a lot of people came this way, which is the centerpiece of what this government is trying to battle. And we're talking about people who work as Uber drivers or in shops, in barbers. So it's mostly working people, but it's not people who are working as software developers and marketeers. They tend to come from, most of these people came from Asia, from poorer countries. It's kind of work-related immigration, whereas there's a completely different type of immigration of people coming from the US, UK, wealthier immigration. And these two groups, they tend to look at immigration as this one big overarching narrative, but it's actually two completely different groups. Also politically, historically, in Portugal, the left has generally opposed people coming from wealthier places, and for reasons of house price rises and inflation, and the right has generally opposed people coming from less wealthy places for other reasons, such as obtaining citizenship and then moving on to other European destinations. So it's two completely distinct groups which behave in a completely different way and are the subject of targeting by completely different sides of the political spectrum. And in this situation right now, the government is trying to target the poorer migrants, but because of, at the end of the day, immigrants are immigrants, people that are coming to the country are all subject to some similar rules. They end up capturing everything and scaring everyone off, but actually that was not their intention. So there are groups in Portugal that generally oppose or take issue with people coming from wealthier countries, and mainly due to reasons of inflation. There are groups in Portugal opposed to people coming from poorer countries, mainly for justified or not reasons of using resources, and some people cite certain safety concerns, and these are completely different groups. And this particular government is interested in the second group. So people who are coming from the US on a digital nomad visa or the UK and think that they are the subject of this, they get it completely wrong. The government wants this government wants this immigration to continue. They just haven't found a way to properly differentiate these groups, because at the end of the day, people are people, and everyone comes to make a better life for themselves. So some of the changes are clearly not constitutional, and that's already been flagged by constitutional experts. And the government has already responded to the far right, which is demanding a further push of these measures, that everyone needs to stop at the line of constitutionality. which is slightly amusing considering some of the proposed changes are clearly not constitutional. But there's a difference between different measures. And one important constitutional principle is the prohibition of retroactivity. So measures that, for example, try to apply new legislation and backdate it to a date that's earlier than the date that the legislation passes, that's clearly unconstitutional, and that's unlikely to stay in this legislation. Measures that are changing, the specific measure that everyone's talking about is moving the time to nationality from 5 years to 10 years. This measure is borderline. It's a gray area. It is probably constitutional, but perhaps not, towards the people that are already residing in the country, because residence and citizenship are two different things. On one hand, on the other hand, they are related to each other, and the likely outcome or the right legal analysis would probably be or should have been a case-by-case analysis. So, for example, if someone has been promised or were under the impression for good reasons that they were promised to be able to apply for citizenship within 5 years, and now it's changing mid-process, then it could be problematic. And then we need to look at, okay, who exactly made these promises? Why has this impression been created? And the biggest relevant group for this is the golden visa population, people who made an investment. One of the main reasons they made this investment is the assumption that they'll be able to apply for citizenship. There hasn't been an express promise that they will be able to apply for citizenship within 5 years, but there's certainly been a lot of quasi-promises, or the government allows these people to believe that they will be able to apply within that time range, and then we need to look at the individual circumstances. The thing is that nobody's going to want to look at the individual circumstances, because that would just make it a very long and difficult process. So the government will need to find a way within or create rules that make sense, that deal with the expectations of people that are mid-process. Or perhaps we're going to end up with people that have already been residents in Portugal for 2 or 3 years being able to apply, and people that have just come, perhaps not. Maybe we're going to end up with some other compromise, or perhaps people who can prove making a financial investment or making other changes. Maybe they will be given some relief, but then that potentially creates a problem towards other groups that perhaps haven't made the same financial investment but made other types of investments. And the government now faces a very difficult balance of trying to figure out how do you mitigate the hit to Portugal's reputation on one hand, and on the other hand you deal with the expectations of all these groups, but still allow this legislation that the government really wants to pass to some degree. So it's going to be a balancing exercise, but what we're going to see eventually, probably at the end of this process, there will be a change in the time for citizenship. How many guarantees will people get, and at what point would they kick in, is yet to be seen. When do you expect to hear some news? So the legislation process has already started. It went to committees. The far right is trying to push this very quickly, so they hope to vote on these measures before the break in Parliament that's expected later this month. Probably it wouldn't happen, so it's more likely that it will be pushed towards the next parliamentary session. But we're going to start hearing voices as the legislative process continues. We're going to start hearing voices and see this reform gradually being scaled back up to a point that it's sustainable, and it's probably going to take months. For anyone inside this process, for anyone considering, for example, applying for citizenship, if you met the criteria for citizenship, for sure apply, because you'll likely be grandfathered. Even though the draft legislation says that you wouldn't, this is almost certainly going to change as things go on, and a wait and see approach is not going to create a legitimate expectation. So it's very different. It's very important to understand that legitimate expectations would be protected, but if people haven't taken the action that created that legitimate expectation, then they wouldn't be protected. So sometimes you have to take a little bit of a risk, and that is one of these cases. The legal community and fund managers are very powerful forces in Portuguese politics. Almost all of them support the current governing party. And it's also important to remember that many of the important politicians, including the Prime Minister, are lawyers, and they come from within that community. So they talk to other lawyers, and lawyers and fund managers are generally very upset about the extreme level to which this reform goes, and are definitely making their point. They're not trying to necessarily help expats as such, but they want to try and preserve the business and wealth that expats are bringing with them, and again remind the government that they are coincidentally hitting a group that they have had absolutely no intention to hit. It's they've tried to deal with one issue, and there's now risk to Portugal's reputation, there's risk to wealth creation, and there's risk to investment in Portugal, and that is something that nobody wants. So how to find the legal balance of how to mitigate this reform is an open question, but there's definitely a lot of important people that are making the point to government on this. So although they're not voting, or people are not voting directly on this, it's an important point, and a big part of the support base of the ruling coalition will now be lobbying on behalf of expats and investors and making these points. The immigration reform, it's going to be a lot less bad than people think it is. The government was trying to appeal to a certain type of voters that have expressed concerns about a certain type of immigration, and ended up putting all immigration in the same bag. But it's important to understand that people investing in Portugal, people coming to Portugal to work remotely, people coming to Portugal to work for Portuguese businesses, to create wealth, to create positions, all of this is immigration that this government wants. It's just a small percentage of immigration in total, and it's somehow the victim of a bigger trend of a government that's trying to respond to the vote of the last election. But as these things are realized, and as some creative minds will try and think how to create new ones within this immigration, it's likely that there will be some mitigation and some relief, at least compared to the proposed measures, and it's going to end up being a lot less bad than people anticipate. We also think it's pretty likely that there will be some improvement on some phases, not just in immigration itself. There's been, for example, a discussion of perhaps introducing new tax benefits for golden visa holders. So perhaps the government will try to compensate golden visa applicants for the extension or anticipated extension of the nationality from 5 to 10 years, and so on. So it's not the group of expats that we're normally working with are not targeted by this reform, but they're a side casualty or collateral damage, if you like, of this reform. But it is not the desirable outcome, and we don't believe that it will stay like this.